Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. My colleague and friend and co-host, Thaddeus McCotter of WJR, the great voice of the Great Lakes, is here with me in New York City tonight. And we're joined by our two colleagues, our professional colleagues, David Drucker of the Washington Examiner. He's in Washington, and John Fund of the National Review Online. And John is either between Washington and New York. He's always moving around. I believe he's in New York tonight. Gentlemen, a very good evening to you. I present this. I have been told very carefully, this is all about the election, the November election, all of it. I'm not looking at doing foreign policy and worrying about the fate of the 21st century and the clash of titans. I'm worried about the election. I'm focusing on that. And I'm told the most important determinative for turnout for the election is the president's approval rating, which has been bumping along 40%, held up by his gregariousness and ability to survive in a hostile environment, Washington, D.C. However, this last week has shown a president who is either, at this point, either detached, that's one word for the presidency, or in another way, has no longer a sense of order, has lost a sense of order in his own administration. Because tonight we have an announcement, New York Times, that the president has approved surveillance aircraft in Syria. Last week, we had serially the president approving airstrikes in Iraq. This during a period that the president has told us one of his signal achievements in his 2 terms is leaving the Iraq war behind and pulling the American military force out of Afghanistan and turning the Middle East over to our allies, our colleagues, our coalition. So I begin with you, Mr. Fund. This sense of disorder, my word, for the Obama administration, a policy a day, does this translate into the midterm election? Does this in any way change the country's opinion of Mr. Obama? Good evening to you, John.
Well, the history of previous midterm elections has been clear. If there is chaos, confusion, policy incoherence in an administration, the president's supporters, especially his soft supporters, stay home. They're not excited. They're confused. They just opt out of the system, the process. All the signs point to an administration that cannot mount a coherent defense of Democratic senators in the fall. That's what they need to keep the Senate.
David, I ask you, before I turn you over to Thaddeus McCotter, I ask you, am I looking too closely at foreign policy? Because the rule is domestic policy rules, and I couldn't now name a domestic policy that is anywhere near dominating the headlines the way foreign policy is. Will this change the direction of the midterms?
Well, I think if you look at it in terms of the president's leadership and how he's being judged as a governor, as somebody who is trying to chart a course for the country and take it somewhere that people like, I think that you're on the right track. If you look at the right track, wrong track numbers, despite an economy that actually continues to do a lot better, although with some caveats, the right track, wrong track, I think the Real Clear Politics average has it at like 28% right, 62.5% wrong, or somewhere in there. So I don't think you're far off if you don't focus necessarily on the foreign policy, but the leadership of that, and I think that's what's causing the president problems.
Well, my question to you, gentlemen, is this. You deal with the poor souls who have to go out and become popular to get votes and hold office. The question is, are they coming back from the campaign trails when you run into them saying things such as I heard back in 2006, where a good friend of mine was running for re-election to the House, and a person who had supported him for years walked up to him and said, I love you, Steve, but I can't be with you this time. I have to send a message to George Bush. Of course, Steve said, I'm not George Bush. He said, I'm sorry, but this is the only way I can do it. Are you hearing that the members are going to feel that they are the way that the electorate is going to send a message to President Obama that they're not happy?
Mr. Fund, you first.
The primary turnout in both parties has been historically low. I think there's some of that, but I think more of that is they're sending a message by not going to vote. They're going to see historically low midterm election turnout, I believe.
Mr. Drucker?
That will hurt Democrats more.
Well, I think that's a very key question, and we may get a better sense of that when members return for a couple of weeks after the August recess. And I think that's what we don't know yet, Thaddeus, is our voters, including a lot of Democrats, so upset with the president and his leadership that they're going to send a message by either voting for a Republican or not voting at all. And I think the part of that we don't know for sure is that in 2006, when you had independent swing voters all go for Democrats enthusiastically show up for Democrats, and a lot of Republicans either vote Democrat or just not show up because they were so disgusted, there really was a turn in the nation against George W. Bush. And as low as the president's approval ratings are, with a Republican Party that has low approval ratings, I don't think we yet know how this is going to shake out. It's not going to be good for Democrats. The question is, how good is it going to be for Republicans?
I want to press this a little bit because we're talking about war in the Middle East. Precisely the reason Mr. Obama emerged as a preferred candidate to Mrs. Clinton in 2008. It was his remarks back in Chicago when he was in the state legislature calling Iraq a dumb war, a stupid war, a bad decision, that identified him as a leader for the Democratic Party. Now, what we're seeing now in the chaos in Iraq, gentlemen, I want to underline this. ISIS is here for the long term. ISIS represents the aspirations of what are called the Takfiri jihadists. These are men, young men, who believe that their mission is to convert all of Islam to their way of seeing, black and white, and then to reconquer the caliphate. First, the abode of Islam to be cleansed, and then the abode of war, that's us, to be cleansed. That's what they believe. This is a transformational ideology. It is not going away. You can't bomb it. You can't destroy it. Maybe a couple of major American armies running it over would set it back, but it's an ideology. The President of the United States is not going to the American people and presenting the case, the facts, and I'm not coming up with special information here. This is well known now in policy circles. We're facing a long-term fire. This is not Al-Qaeda. This is not a Buick that wants transnational fight to make a one big headline and scare the Americans out of the Gulf. This is a transformation of the young people in Islam to be converted to a murder cult. The president is not leading, so I'm going to press you all. This damages the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party. Thaddeus and I can spend a deal of time talking about what's weak about the Republican Party, but it's not weak about war fighting. It hasn't been these last 14 years. The Democrats, and John, I've asked too long of a question. I'll ask you. This damages the Democrats' understanding of why they elected Barack Obama and why they gave him Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid as their leaders in the Senate. And when it does that, I think it's more than no turnout, John. I think it cuts them adrift. They don't know which way to go for 16 either.
Well, remember that the selling point for Barack Obama was he was no drama Obama. We were going to see competent, coolly detached leadership, analytical decision-making. He was an intellectual, constitutional law professor. How's that looking to people? How's that working out for you?
David, the Democrats, they do not have an explanation. They do not have a rationalist. They don't even have a leader to explicate how bad it's gotten.
Well, I think we've seen a lot of frustration among congressional Democrats, and they of course, are the ones under threat in November. And I think that the key question is, does the frustration and the unhappiness translate on down the line to Democratic voters, and particularly to Democratic base voters in those contested Senate seats? Now, despite all of the president's problems, that he's got a lot of them and it's reflected in the polling, I think there's still a degree of loyalty to the president personally among a segment of the Democratic base, because he is a historic figure, and they have felt that he's been unfairly maligned by the Republican Party. But where are those voters, and will they be in the right places for Democrats in the fall? That's what we have to find out.
Your measure, Thaddeus, the dovish Democrats, the peace-first Democrats, the swords into plowshares Democrats, are they challenged, unhorsed, threatened by this turn of events in the Middle East?
I think they're threatened in the sense that the policy that the Obama administration put forward from the time he first ran against Senator Clinton has proven to have failed. In many ways, it mirrors the initial Reconstruction phase of the United States in Iraq under the Bush administration. Yet, unlike President Bush, with the surge, the Petraeus surge, President Obama does not seem to be able to even engage in the process of trying to find a better alternative to the policy that's in place and failing.
Thaddeus McCotter, WJR, the great voice of the Great Lakes. David Drucker, Washington Examiner. John Fund, National Review Online. When we come back, we'll turn to domestic matters. This matter of Lois Lerner. Has she been found? Does it matter? Is anybody watching now? The IRS will give us another explanation for those missing emails. I'm John Batchelor.